do something nicer than that car wash on Oleander Drive? And I know you can't answer the question today, but I think in your planning, we ought to figure out a way to, that everybody has got to agree that that's not nice street frontage on Oleander Drive.
Sure. And I'm hoping that our standards that we create will help address that street standard that you're referring to. And I'm struggling here trying to find the unshare my screen.
I'll just interrupt for a second there. Ron, you are now the host, but Tracy initiated the recording of the meeting. So it's being recorded from this point forward, and we'll be glad to share that recording with anyone who wishes to have it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Demir, you should be able to share your screen now.
All right, are y'all able to see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, I'm gonna run through really quickly, just again to reiterate what the frontage standards are, why we have them, how they'll work, and where we'll have them. And feel free to stop me at any point if you have any questions or comments. So as Ron mentioned, the intention of this is similar to the change of use, some of those before and after images you saw, and the comment about the car washes, just how can we ensure along these major thoroughfares through which people traverse the city, how they can be made to function better and also look better. And so we've utilized frontage types that were identified in the comprehensive plan, which were determined through studies and analysis by current staff, as well as former staff, the former urban designer. And basically these frontage standards will regulate building placement, facade treatments, parking locations, signage and landscaping. These are designated along various street types similar to the existing Wrightsville Avenue corridor overlay district. This is an image from our comprehensive plan, and it is identified as a portion of Carolina Beach Road as you approach downtown. And what we want to do is just increase the development potential. We don't want to be overly restrictive or prescriptive for developers and still allow flexibility, but like Ron mentioned, still ensure a sense of consistency along the streetscape. And this is an example, not saying that every frontage will look like this. This is more of an urban setting, which may be appropriate in certain parts of the city. But this just shows what consistency in building placement and landscaping and sidewalks, what it can do. It can help to encourage different transportation opportunities, as well as increase business visibility from the street, and just encourage more people to visit these areas as they really become not only thoroughfares, but destinations in the city that people want to go to and spend more time in and have easier access to. And so we've established 3 frontage categories. Each frontage category contains 2 frontage types. And basically a category is designated along a portion of the street. So urban, as I mentioned, it's typically closer to downtown, where buildings are placed closer to the street. And you'll have 2 options as a developer that you're able to choose with that designation, either the civic frontage type or the side frontage type. And so if your portion of the street, or if the property you own is along a portion of the street that is designated as semi-urban, then you may select a category that's greater above its designation. So you may place an urban frontage type, but not a suburban. Is that clear?
Yes.
Okay. And here is a breakdown of the standards. So as you can see, for the urban frontage category, broken into the two frontage types. There is a front and side street minimum to maximum setback range of 10 to 30 feet. Just some basic building design standards that we'd like to implement. Maximum blank wall length, fenestration, which means the openings in the building, such as windows and doors, as well as entrance requirement, access to those entrances, and landscaping. And I've been working on some images to better illustrate sort of what we're going for with this. And you can see here in this example, it leaves you space. You're allowed to set up a plaza space, or if you have any outdoor amenity areas that don't need to be landscaped, or you would prefer not to have landscaping, that's okay. We'll allow that. But any other portion that's not a walkway would need to be landscaped. It allows you space for outdoor seating and dining. And you can see the fenstration on each side. So along the side street, it would be 50% along this portion here, and then 60%. And you can kind of get a feel for what that is along the ground floor. And then just to show that all buildings don't need to be that scale, this is an example of the side frontage type, which regulates where the parking can be. And we would prefer it, or we prescribe it to be along the side interior. It can be along either side interior. We would prefer that it be accessed from side streets where possible, to reduce the number of driveways along those primary streets.
And Demir, this is just for that urban street frontage type, correct?
Yes. And here's an example in the city. This is along South Kerr Avenue. This portion of the street is designated, I believe, as semi-urban, but this is an urban example. And it just shows that you can build something higher than its designation and still look good. We just want a baseline standard along certain portions of the street. And we still allow that flexibility for development. And then this is getting into the semi-urban frontage requirements, which typically allow deeper setbacks, which would permit maximum 2 rows of parking lot screening, and a walkway in front of the building. And it still allows buildings to frame the street, still have visibility and some walkability for pedestrians from the right of way. And similar design standards as far as having an active ground floor for pedestrians. And the only difference between the two types really is whether you have parking or whether it's landscape. There are examples of both throughout the city. And I think I have another graphic of that here. Just to show. So you'd get your baseline, just standard landscaped area in front of the building. Again, if you have outdoor seating, that can be implemented wherever you'd like. You can even recess a portion of the building and stick it there, as long as the building meets the setback standard. Some of it can be recessed to allow space for whatever else is needed. But you can see the access here from the right of way. We would encourage crosswalks, things like that, to really encourage safety and provide an aesthetic improvement as well. And you can see the buffer here, or the screening of the parking area from the right of way. And this works in cohesion with the street tree requirements that'll be coming in the landscaping section.
Demir, can you point to which elements on that facade you're counting as the 40% fenestration?
Yes, sir. So the 40% will be along each facade, so that won't be all together. So if you have a building elevation, it would be this portion here of the building. And you can see there with all these blue windows and doors outlined, that's about 40% of the facade.
Okay.
And then same along this side. This is a little bit greater, probably closer to 60, but. I'll see if I can come up with another diagram that can, you know,
So you're counting windows as fenestration?
yes, sir. Any windows,
Okay.
doors, or openings in the building.
Okay,
So it could be like an internal walkway or passageway to that will count. Okay. And this is an example along Oleander. And you can see here, it allows the space. It's within the 75-foot setback range. And you got your walkway, you got landscaping, and your parking. And then the last is the suburban frontage. So that just basically allows for, you know, your big box retail, places where you'll require a lot of parking out front. We still want a baseline landscaping standard to enhance the view from the street. And we've also added a provision that street facing parking roads shall be prohibited, but we are open to discussion on that because I know that may restrict the number of parking in some circumstances. Are there any thoughts on this in particular?
Demir? Mr.
Yes.
Ron, we had a couple of questions. One is from Danny Adams, wanted to know where will the parcel designations of the 3 types be noted? Because they believe this will be a big driver in the site design and building placement right out of the gate. Danny, I'll try to answer that. Initially, we know for sure they will be part of the zoning code or the zoning requirements here in Article 5. What we're still having conversation on is how do we get them mapped as part of a zoning map or an additional layer to make sure that they're readily available to anyone who may be using our online services. Does that answer that question?
Yeah, I was just curious if it was going to be an overlay or, you know, how we would know, you know, which one it was.
Right. Yeah. And Demir will go over a map here in a few minutes, I think, that shows those designations. Matt had a question on the urban street frontage setback be 0. Demir, do you want to try to answer that one? Assuming a downtown building. First of all, see, this would not be in their CBD, Matt. So anything in our central business district would be restrict or allowed to develop under the central business district standards. The street frontages would be outside of that central business district. But Demir, if you can kind of go over the setback one more time with the urban street frontage or the if you don't mind reviewing that.
Right. The minimum 10 foot was based on the typical zoning districts that are along these corridors, which are commercial. So the CB and other districts within the commercial district designation, which have a minimum setback of 10 feet. And then 30 was the maximum that you'd see in existing development in an urban setting.
Right. So it wouldn't apply to central business district or urban mixed use standards. These would be like your central, these would be like CB, RB, ONI, CS, those type of zoning districts. Is that correct, Demir?
That's correct. And I believe there's a few more. Yeah, so these requirements shall not be applied to the historic district overlay, single dwelling residential districts, historic districts, mixed use, which include UMX, RO, and CBD, and the cemetery districts.
All right. And Tyler's asking if you can show the draft map. This is an example here. Is that correct, Demir?
Yeah, this is an example here. And a lot of places, they'll have both a map in their code like this, or in combination with, like in City View, the center lines will be mapped, for example. So you'll be able to go in City View, see the zoning district, and also toggle these street frontage requirements as well, is what we're thinking. But we still need to work on that a little bit with our GIS technician.
Can you go back to that example map real quickly?
Yeah.
It's fine. The one previous. So, and maybe you went over this, but I apologize if you did and I didn't hear it, but you'll see the breaks are at intersections. So it's So that area west of the area of Oleander in this map, west of Independence, as an example, would be a semi-urban frontage requirement. The area between Independence and what is that road? Where Trader Joe's is basically, along Oleander, would have a suburban street frontage, and then the balance of Oleander would be a semi-urban frontage requirement. But the break is at an intersection. So it's not like one side of the street is doing differently than the other side. Thank you.
And I just wanted to help give you guys an idea of how these were determined. So I set up a Google Earth tour. You can see this is Carolina Beach Road here. The red, the blue, and the yellow lines are urban, semi-urban, and suburban. And I also went ahead and drew out what the setback range would be. And so as you're riding down this road, you could see most of the buildings fall in this range. And then when it transitions here, you know, you see the setback range increase again. And then you also start to see the inclusion of more parking. And we really want to improve places like this lot here, that just, there's no street trees, no sidewalks, no landscaping. And it can just use a lot of work. And as you transition to a more suburban context, you could see the lot sizes get a lot bigger, as well as the building footprints. And that is what is used to help determine these designations. And as you transition back into an urban setting, the building footprints tend to get a little smaller, as well as the lot sizes. So we came up with these designations based on existing development and where we see them going in the future.
So Demir, this is Glenn. As I'm looking at your map, those red shaded areas, they don't depict a build to line, they depict a range within which the building facade could be located. Is that correct?
Yes, sir. The minimum to the maximum, 10 to 30 feet for urban. Were there any questions in how we determine these designations or any?
There is a question in the chat. How were these designations decided?
Okay, sorry, trying to pull up the chat here. Okay, so these were identified in the comprehensive plan during previous analysis, as well as our current analysis. And as I just showed with the Google Earth, that was a very brief view, but lot sizes, existing development, traffic, existing plans, such as the Carolina Beach streetscape plan that's currently underway. Does that answer that question?
Yes.
Okay.
Can we go back and do the flyby down Carolina Beach Road again? And walk me through the red areas where buildings are currently set back, or ones where, you know, they're in there or not. So the gas station there on the corner.
Right.
How is that? How does the red line, the two red lines of the red shaded area impact that currently and then moving forward?
Well, currently they would be considered, if the plan would be to be adopted as is. The land development code were to be adopted with this section as is. This would be considered non-conforming, and only the change of use that Ron identified previously in the presentation would trigger the necessary frontage requirements to be implemented.
So for every building that's not, the footprint's not in the red area would be non-conforming.
Yes, sir.
Now zoom down the road real quick, just quickly.
So this one here. And then this one here.
So what consideration has been given that, you know, if I've got this piece of property and it's got a non-conforming building on it and a different type of a business wants to buy it, but the cost is going to be so prohibitive for them to change and meet the zoning requirements, you've kind of made the property, you know, less valuable because of the restrictions of and bringing it back into compliance.
Can I just, so I know who was asking that question?
But this is Mike Keenan.
Mike Keenan. Okay. Thanks, Mike, for the question. I'm sorry, I didn't see you pop up. Are you going back to the change in use or these particular street standards?
Well, I'm just saying if I own an existing piece of property and a totally different type of business somebody wants to buy it, if they've got to bring the property into compliance, that's a value consideration as far as what the buyer is going to pay for it and cost. I mean, it'll destroy the values of the existing properties and lessen their ability to be able to transition. Because nobody will want it if they've got to move the building.
Well, they won't have to move the building to be brought into compliance with the street frontage standards. Going back to the change in use, they may have to put in some sidewalk or some landscaping. If there's no building expansion example, they won't have to move the building to bring it into compliance with it because the street frontage says it has to be within 10 feet of the front property. Is that what your concern is?
Yes.
Yeah. If it's just going to be a change in use from, let's say, a restaurant to an office or an office to a restaurant, and the building is outside of that required setback, the city isn't going to say you have to move your building or you have to add on to the front to bring it in compliance. We would just acknowledge that it's a non-conforming use. Now, the change in use may trigger a sidewalk or some low buffer or something like that I went over earlier.
Yeah.
But we're not going to require someone to move the building, physically move the building on their site to bring it in compliance with the setback.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. You're welcome. I hope that answers your question.
It did. Thank you.
Demir, did you have others or any other questions on how it was developed and the idea behind it?
Hi, Henry Nadeau here.
Hi, Henry.
Just had a quick question. I know we've worked on a couple of projects out there in that part of town, and it's not always the best part of town, depending on what block you're standing on. And I know the issue that we had last time we were working out there was the homeless camps, spread out through there, and working with national developers who had concerns about having the parking being located in the back behind the building where you don't have the visibility, worried about people getting in and out of their cars after dark, where nobody can see them in the back? I mean, is there flexibility with this for, or what? How do you address that concern? I guess the lack of visibility for people parking.
Someone want to try that? Christine or Glenn or somebody want to jump in on that one? I'm trying to jot the question down too. Demir, do you want to try it?
Yeah, I think contextually, the parking will be available where appropriate. It's really only going to be limited to behind the build. Well, we don't ever prescribe it to be behind a building. It can be, if it's urban, again, in the side, like in this example here, and allow it to come around that corner and reach the rear that way. And we would hope that in addition to lighting of the parking lot, would help address any of those concerns. Because this would be in the
lighting and the landscaping. The landscaping doesn't need to be so tall that someone couldn't see into the parking lot. In fact, I think if I'm remembering correctly, it's a prescription for just a 3-foot tall planting. So the idea is not to create unsafe environments, but to enhance the streetscape.
Well, but you go behind some of these buildings along Carolina Beach Road, and you don't always find yourself in comfortable spaces. It's just a reality, in that neighborhood.
This is Jim Smith. I can speak from the public sector or the private sector. Hanover Center, we put nice benches out for people to sit on and relax, and we come in the morning and there are homeless people on the benches. So very visible locations they will be at, very secluded places they will be at. And unfortunately, it's a problem that we need to address, but I don't think putting the parking behind or alongside of a building is inviting them. They have an invitation everywhere they can find a spot. So I don't see where that would, we should, change this ordinance because we're fearful that homeless people are going to hang out in the parking lot in the back, because they hang out everywhere.
There was also a question about requiring rear connector streets or cross access. And I think that's an important question and an important consideration. And we are proposing to require connectivity between parking lots, which will lend itself a little bit to that safety issue, as well as we are hopeful deal with some of our traffic congestion concerns.
Yeah, Christine, that is actually covered in parking, which is part of Article 5, but it was released to the public in November, and we just presented, actually we just released earlier, I guess it was in November, and we were doing a work session with our planning commission in January on that. So we would be glad to talk to you guys about parking as well at some point. We're not prepared to do that today, but certainly we can get that scheduled. I can work with Tyler on that if that's a topic that you guys would like to talk about.
Hey, this is Danny Adams. I think another thing that would be good to have some dialogue about is the fenestration requirements. To my knowledge, this is the first time outside the CBD that I've seen a minimum requirements being discussed. And, even downtown where it's stated as predominant, which we interpret to be 51%, there's either certain building types or service areas of buildings sometimes that front right-of-ways that really don't lend themselves to wanting windows. So I just don't want to get boxed into a lot more prescriptive things that say just because you think, windows promote transparency at the ground floor, that they're always going to be a beneficial thing to the architecture or to the buildings.
Yeah, I
I had to
understand that.
step away for a minute. Danny, just as you were starting your question or your statement, sorry.
It was regarding fenestration requirement and it being outside of the CBD and it possibly being too restrictive for architecture. Is that correct, Danny? For architectural flexibility.
Yeah, Ron, I just said that, even downtown, we struggle because we have service areas and loading docks, or, there's going to always be times where certain buildings or certain uses on facades don't always want to have windows. So being really prescriptive about these percentages, I just want to have some dialogue and some degree of flexibility, because there are multiple ways to promote good architecture and connectivity, whether it be physically or visibly at, important facades, without just designating window minimums.
Sure. We'll be glad to have that conversation, Danny, with you if you wanted to provide us some feedback, some thoughts on that. Looking at the notes from the Planning Commission work session. Go ahead. I'm sorry. Thought someone, Bruce Bowman had made a comment about the 20-foot blank wall length, suggested that we use a percentage. So I know that's something we're going to look into. Is that correct, Amir?
Yeah, that's correct.
We'll be talking about within the next couple of weeks. We'll be meeting as a staff to go over the comments from the Planning Commission from last week. He also felt like the glazing standards appeared to be a little bit open-ended. So we were going to have some conversation on that. So if you wanted to give us your thoughts on that, Danny, we're certainly more than welcome to consider it.
Okay, thank you.
You can shoot me or Demir an email on that, or we can have another conversation about it, however you want to do it. Okay, Demir?
Sorry, I'm just checking the chat.
Yeah.
Okay. Lastly, in addition to these frontage standards, we did want to help come up with some type of initiative or way to achieve infill and greater redevelopment in these sections of the city that are really serving as gaps right now. And so we are hoping to encourage something that provides an enhanced design, building design or frontage type that enhances the street, additional landscaping, reduced surface parking area, and environmental design. And so we have provided this chart here, which lists current initiatives that the city would like to see and incentives for developers. So, for example, building design. If someone were to come in and propose a development and the building height is equal to at least half the width of the primary frontage street, then you would be able to select 2 of these initiatives or incentives. If someone were to come in and provide that as well as complying with the frontage type of an urban frontage category, then one would be able to select 3 of these incentives. And both of these initiatives and incentives are included to help encourage greater build out. We hope to work with the development community and really provide incentives and include initiatives that benefit both the public and the private sectors along these frontages and rights of way. there's a question from Jamie. When are these new standards being adopted? Glenn
Jamie,
or Ron?
I'll try to answer that question. What we're doing right now is they've been introduced to our council. We released them for public inspection and public comments, and we have taken these particular standards to Planning Commission in a work session. As we move forward, we're going to have, our goal right now is to have everything in one notebook, if you will, a composite draft of everything by March 31st. And then we'll move forward for public hearings with our Planning Commission and City Council. Sometime, my guess is we're probably looking in June timeframe for public hearing with our Planning Commission and City Council, barring any setbacks, like if there's other conversations, other discussions with groups or anything like that. But right now, our goal is to have a release of all of the land development code, including everything we've gone over and yet to go over, available by March 31st in a composite draft. That would include our reconciliation, our zoning maps, everything like that. As far as when it is adopted and goes into effect, once it gets to council for the public hearing process, we can't predict the length of time it may take to get through that process. Is that helpful at all? I'm not anticipating, I'm anticipating summer of 2021. All right, thank you. Still a ways to go is my point, I guess. Okay, is anything else there, Demir, with your presentation, or any comments on any questions thus far?
I was just wondering what people thought about these initiatives and incentives. If they think they're helpful, if they think the initiatives can be met reasonably.
And we're willing, if you guys want to take a look at it a little further and want to provide us your feedback offline too, we'll be glad to consider that as well. Doesn't have to be just like, doesn't have to react to the presentation today. If you have initial comments you'd like to share, certainly please do, but we'll be glad to take them offline as well.
Yes, please. And with that, I will transfer it back over to you, Ron, and then stop sharing.
All right. And I'm going to just kind of real quickly just in the last couple of slides that we have, and maybe answer Amy's question had earlier about the next published, the work sessions published. I believe that was your question from earlier. Can you see my screen now? Again, is it like a City of Wilmington webpage, basically?
Yeah.
All right. All of the land development code articles that have been released are located on a project-specific webpage on the city's website. It's www.wilmingtonnc.gov/LDC. It'll take you to a screen that looks similar to this one on the screen. The red circles here would indicate where the article, or indicate links to each article that has been released for public discussion, public involved and stakeholder input, as well as you can get them to the box here on the left. When you get there, say if you were interested in this Article 5, you would click Article 5, you would go through it, and there's an opportunity to provide public comments right on the website itself, or you can submit emails or however you want to do it. We're taking comments any way we can get them. As far as the next work session, Amy, we are scheduled to go over with the Planning Commission about our parking standards. And that is scheduled for January 6th at 3:30. It's prior to their regularly scheduled Planning Commission meeting for the month of January. It is specifically talking about parking and access. That was released to the public in middle of November. One thing that we have, major component of that parking standard is that we are proposing to eliminate minimum parking standards for non-residential developments outside of the 1945 corporate limits. And minimum parking standards, period, would be not required for anything inside the 1945 corporate limits as proposed. So just, we believe that'll help with incentivize redevelopment. We think they can go a long ways in potentially lowering development costs, because if we're not dictating how many parking spaces minimally somebody has to prepare or provide just to meet a standard, potential less land someone has to purchase, less impervious surface someone has to build, so it's less stormwater that has to be treated, which can essentially drop the equivalent residential unit that the businesses are paying for the stormwater fees, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we see a lot of benefit of it, and what we're open discussion, and that's a topic y'all would like for us to go in a little bit more detail on. We'll be more than happy to meet with you on that. From there, I mentioned earlier that we have a work session scheduled with our city council. I believe it's scheduled for January 26th. And that is to go over signage and tree preservation, land and landscaping. Our attorney's office is working with us on those standards. There's several things, court cases, constitutional issues and things that our attorney's office really wants council to be aware of before we release anything to the public for signage and landscaping and tree preservation. So that is what we're scheduled for now, that we know about at this moment. I would anticipate if we're having that work session for signage and landscaping at January 26th, is probably gonna be towards the end of or mid-February before we actually release those documents for public inspection. Is that helpful with the schedule?
Yeah, and would that be before the council meeting as well?
It's scheduled for that. The 26th is on that morning. It's like 9 to 1, I think is when it's scheduled.
Okay,
Or
thank
tentatively scheduled.
thank you.
January 26th. That's as what we know today anyway. And in this slide presentation, and you can actually get this from any of our website, there's an annotated table of contents, which takes you to our current code where a lot of these things are addressed, as well as Article 5, the draft proposal. You can click within. We can send this email to Tyler, or the presentation to Tyler if he wants to distribute it to the group, where you'll have it as well. But it's not too different than what we've presented in to some other boards. So any additional questions? Would you guys like for Tyler and me to work towards getting something scheduled for parking? Do you want to take a look at that first? You can let Tyler know.
I think there were a couple of immediate questions about the parking, Ron.
What's that, Glenn?
I think there were a couple of immediate questions about the parking, possibly on-street parking, minimum parking standards in some situations.
Media questions?
Immediate, sorry.
They're in the chat.
Okay, I don't see them, sorry.
Are you going to start enforcing no parking on streets? And could you also put a maximum parking standard that is more realistic, considering parking is sometimes based on worst case scenario?
Well, then I can certainly, I'm trying to find my chat, sorry. When I started sharing my screen, it throws things off again, so. What we have done for maximum parking standards are we've reviewed. We did some on-site, staff did a research on what our uses are doing. And that's actually part of the presentation for parking. Looked at various uses, and this was done in 2019, except for Lowe's Home Improvement and Home Depot, which we did since the pandemic. But everything else that we studied was in 2019. I want to make that clear because I think the media missed that point a few weeks ago. So we looked at trends, and we have looked at that as well as some of our benchmark cities on, and attempted to do what we call right size our maximum parking standards. In some situations, we didn't change them because a restaurant was generating back in 2019 pretty much 100% need for the parking that was being provided. So we did not change the maximum. In other situations, such as some of our big box home improvement stores and retail, we are proposing changes to the maximum standard from the 5 per 1,000 to, I believe it was, I want to say 1 to 300 square feet maximum. I'd have to move on to the next thing to work on. I forget some of the details, sorry. So what it requires, it's not a minimum standard, but it is a maximum standard. So we wouldn't regulate minimum. So we have attempted to answer that question, I think, to right size our maximum parking. So everything isn't planned for that day following Thanksgiving, which is what we hear a lot of times. Each one of us rode by, I mean, and this probably wasn't a good year to do so because people weren't out shopping like they were, but I have a picture of Porter's Neck Walmart just because I happened to go there on Friday following Thanksgiving, and it was probably 15% of the parking spaces were filled, and this was like at 9:30, 10 o'clock that morning. So it wasn't a good example, but I was interested in seeing that. But we are seeing that phenomenon across the country with the introduction of online sales. People are using that as often. You also had pre-2020 where every business they were already open Thanksgiving, 24/7, that kind of thing. So I don't like using the term Black Friday sales, but that's what everyone is still using, aren't as prevalent. Everything didn't open up. I think people are being introduced now to the convenience of the online ordering and going by and getting things picked up and delivered right to their trunk with this pandemic. So we have looked at what we call right sizing our maximum parking standards. What was the other question about regulating?
Are we going to enforce no parking on street?
Our zoning code wouldn't do anything to enforce that, but we have been working or would continue to work with our parking management staff should we need to, if we see an influx of parking issues on residential streets, particularly inside our 45 corporate limits as a result of not having minimum standards. If there's known non-enforcement issues, let us know, and we can certainly let our police department know. Any additional questions? Tyler, do we want to get together again on parking?
Yes.
Okay. We'll work out, you and I'll work out a time off site.
Yeah, and honestly, I think if there's any way that y'all could give me the video that I could send out
Sure.
from what we've recorded here today, I think people, visually need to see some of this stuff. I think it's helpful. I really appreciate you taking the time to put the presentations together. People need to see it and think about their properties and parcels and business. And then I suspect we'll get some good feedback here pretty shortly. I've gotten some while we've been having this conversation. So.
Okay, great. My phone number, my email address. I think you find most of the time we're pretty open for feedback. So I know Danny specifically had some questions on some thoughts on the glazing requirements as an example. Love to hear his viewpoints on that. And anyone else who has any thoughts on what we've talked about today. I do know, Tyler, that we want to get involved with get you guys included on the landscaping and signage too. I just don't know at what point we can do that. But the sooner the better.
Yes, thank you.
So we're still trying to work out some scheduling things on our end too for that. All right, well, I want to say thanks on behalf of staff. Thanks to each one of you for taking your time during the day this morning to meet with us and hear from us. I hope you guys found it at least worthwhile. And okay, thank you. Zoom meetings are awkward for me.
Bye, everyone. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.